when we watch a movie, when we watch something that is scripted, they're actors who likely aren't actually going through that situation. Like the movie A Beautiful Mind. We think about any big blockbuster movie that tackles mental health concerns. Those actors are not actually going through those situations. They're mimicking the production team and the writer's understanding of what those mental health concerns are. So that's another situation, right? When we're talking about the misinformation and misunderstanding of mental health concerns that are portrayed, if you go on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, right? There's a lot of things that I think are misconstrued and misunderstood, unfortunately. But what we're talking about today is they're real people going through real, authentic issues in real time. And that's a whole different beast to tackle.
Totally. Because I think that's a whole other layer of these people putting their lives out there and being vulnerable and being authentic. They're opening themselves up for the world to see.
This is Dr. Laura. Welcome to Mind Candy Podcast, where we empower women's voices and tackle current issues related to psychology.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Laura from Mind Candy again. I have a very special episode today. We're going to be talking about reality TV and reality TV consulting. I have Dr. Jackie Hrzich. She is a psychologist and consultant. Dr. Jackie, take it away.
Hey friends. I'm super excited for this. I actually love talking all about consulting and especially the reality show side of things because I think there are so many things that people have misconceptions about when it comes to that world because we make a lot of assumptions based off of what we see on TV. So I get a little bit more of the behind the scenes look at things. So I'm excited to share some of my reality behind the scenes that way.
The real reality behind reality TV. Hey, listeners, I just want to make it super clear today, just to manage expectations. Dr. Jackie is like me. We're ethical gals, ethical psychologists, and while she can't talk exactly what reality TV shows she works on, she can definitely talk in more generalizations of her experiences.
Absolutely.
What is it like working in reality TV? I imagine it is incredibly dynamic, incredibly chaotic, all the things. What's your experience? I'm sure a lot of listeners who love reality TV are curious to know what goes on behind the scenes from a psychological perspective as a consultant.
It is fascinating on so many levels. So it's interesting because I get to work with a lot of people both prior to them being cast on shows and during the time that they are going through the production process, and as well as after they finish production or after the shows actually air, which are usually a good 6 months to a year plus after filming actually ends. And I work really closely with the actual production companies and the executives and those behind the scenes people. It's so fascinating because I think there are a lot more real experiences that happen than people assume, right? So when we watch reality TV, a lot of times we're like, there is no way that that is actually happening, or that has to be edited in some way, or, they are coerced to do this, or they were told that they have to do this, and this is acting. And in reality, yes, there is some editing. A lot of it is very chunked down to a much smaller amount of time than what they actually recorded. But these people are actually going through these experiences. And I think that's something that it's easy to assume that this is just, acting, or these people didn't actually go through anything, or they're not real people because they are kind of this figurehead in a lot of ways. But working behind the scenes, you see that these people are going through very, very real things, whether that's dating, whether that's relationships, whether that's, different kinds of challenge shows or things that they're exposed to. But I think there is this disconnect a lot of times that as viewers of reality TV, we tend to almost picture these people as actors and actresses when they are not. They are very much coming in as real people and going through experiences that we tend to only see a very, very small snippet of. So it is just very fascinating to actually see things behind the scenes and actually see that play out in real time.
Oh, that is so fascinating. And, for the listeners, I have to admit, I don't watch a lot of reality TV. And so I think someone like me who doesn't watch so much reality TV, I probably, just being honest here, probably just assume it's all like scripted and panned. And, to know your work, it's fascinating that there's a lot of psychological testing and assessment and HR type of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that I think would shock people. It shocked me when you were telling me about it because I didn't realize how much goes into it. And I think it makes it even more interesting when you're watching reality TV to know that there's so much reality going on, right? Instead of it just being a scripted, truncated thing. That's just so fascinating for me. And the fact that it's really, honestly, not only is it really way more real than we may realize. It's such a new and emerging field. And so I would imagine that psychologists like you having to do the work of working with producers, cast members, things like that, there's a lot that you have to do. I bet you're very busy.
It is really interesting because the field is still developing. There's not a ton of research because if we think about reality TV as a whole, that didn't really emerge until the 90s, really early 2000s, when things started to really come out in terms of reality TV, like with Survivor and Challenge and Real World and those types of things. So those were really like the pioneer kind of reality shows that first started. And I want to say, I want to say it was Survivor, but I'm not 100% certain. But there was a contestant that was on one of the challenge type shows who ended up dying by suicide after filming had completed. And that's when more of the mental health and psychology fields kind of got into that world of production because people started to realize that these are very real experiences that people are going through and that these are real people with emotions and with mental health and that they're going through really difficult experiences. So that's kind of where this field started and started to emerge. And it's developed over time and grown in a lot of ways. And now, kind of like you were mentioning, there's much more assessment that goes into it. Obviously, every show is a little bit different, and not every show utilizes, these processes, but a majority of them do now just because there is so much more awareness of mental health and again what goes into just this process of production and being a public figure, because it's not just the production process that they're going through, which is very challenging in a lot of ways because you have cameras on you constantly, you're in controlled environments a lot of times, and people can feel really isolated, and there is some level of them feeling like they're kind of losing their own identity and reality by being in those situations. But post production, in terms of not sharing certain details because they have contracts that they can't talk about things until shows air, which tends to be a good amount of time later. But then once the show actually airs, a lot of times those people get so much public backlash and feedback on social media platforms, in person, from family and friends, from just a lot of different sources within their world. And I think, again, these are things that a lot of times we kind of forget about as viewers, but that has really taken the psychology world by storm in a lot of ways, and we've been able to bring mental health into that process a lot more, even in terms of planning. So production will consult with us and talk to us sometimes about what different things within their experiment or within their environment that might trigger certain things for people, whether it be relationship dynamics, whether it be, different sources of trauma triggers or things that might make them feel more isolated or different factors that could exacerbate mental health symptoms if they already are experiencing certain things. So it just is really, really fascinating how this has very much developed over time and how it continues to develop.
Even the most successful couples can have breakdowns in communication. However, Compass Psychological Services provides tools to help navigate these pressures together.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking, I'm having this thought, and I wonder if some of our listeners are having this thought of when we watch a movie, when we watch something that is scripted, they're actors who likely aren't actually going through that situation. Like, the movie A Beautiful Mind. We think about any big blockbuster movie that tackles mental health concerns. Those actors are not actually going through those situations. They're mimicking the production team and the writer's understanding of what those mental health concerns are. So that's another situation, right? When we're talking about the misinformation and misunderstanding of mental health concerns that are portrayed, if you go on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, right? There's a lot of things that I think are misconstrued and misunderstood, unfortunately. But what we're talking about today is they're real people going through real, authentic issues in real time. And that's a whole different beast to tackle. And having that perspective and empathy is so important, I feel like, when we're watching these kind of shows.
Totally. Because I think that's a whole other layer of these people putting their lives out there and being vulnerable and being authentic in a lot of ways that they're opening themselves up for the world to see. And even people that might have a certain level of guardedness, right? Understandably so, there are still, a lot of moments where things come up or you forget that the cameras are rolling or you're in a certain situation where someone is really triggered by something and their authentic emotions very much come out. And so even for a lot of people watching themselves back, right, when the show actually airs, it can be really challenging for them to actually see themselves going through a lot of these experiences that they had a year prior, 6 months prior, however long prior, and to re-experience that. Because for some of them, those are really challenging moments. And there are thousands, millions, billions of people that are also watching them go through that and then are commenting on the way that they handled a situation when in reality, other people could very much be experiencing those same things. So, in some ways, I've heard that it can be really helpful that viewers see this authenticity and the vulnerability that they share in terms of like their emotions or their mental health experiences, etc., because it makes them more real and people can connect with that and relate to that. And there are certain shows that really highlight certain diagnostics or experiences, whether it be docu-series type shows or whether it be shows specifically about certain mental health conditions or experiences that way. And the things that I've heard from participants, it's actually really supportive that they get a lot of feedback and they get a lot of this really encouraging feedback and support because other people can relate to their stories and their experiences, whether it be dating, whether it be navigating life with X, Y, or Z challenges, diagnostics, etc. So in those ways, a lot of times people get really positive feedback and they are so appreciative of that. And they also experience the complete opposite flip side where people are very critical or judgmental of them, their choices, the way that they navigated situations, which can feel so heavy for people, especially when they are experiencing these things and these very real emotions or challenges or potential mental health difficulties themselves. And then they have that added layer of millions of people seeing them in this vulnerable state and then critiquing everything that they had gone through or minimizing their experience or saying there's no way that that's real and really just denying a lot of those things. So there's both pros and cons, and the public feedback is definitely one of the things that I hear the most in terms of the challenges that come from production, for sure.
Compass Psychological Services helps you manage stress and maintain a healthy work-life balance.
Dr. Jackie, I'm so curious to know, walk us through a typical day of being a media consultant for reality TV. Like, what are the tasks that you do? What does a typical day look like? Because I was so curious to learn this when you told me before. And it was just so fascinating.
Yeah, great question. So my job looks very different depending on what production is needing us for and what type of show we are actually working on. At the beginning of a lot of the casting process, we'll do evaluations. That could be in person, that could be virtual, where we do a lot of assessment, a lot of interviews with each person. And we're really trying to navigate fit for that specific production and things that could potentially arise given that specific production. So each different type of show, type of production has its own challenges, has its own set of factors that could potentially exacerbate certain mental health difficulties that could really challenge people in a different way that either wouldn't be conducive for them or their mental health or wouldn't be helpful for the actual production process. Um, and so we want to protect people and protect the other cast members and the production crew within that entire process. So that's what a lot of our evaluation is based off of. Um, so again, that's more interview type of work and evaluations and assessments that we utilize during that stage of the process. The other side of things could be if I'm actually on set. So that's a lot more crisis work. It's also consulting with some of either the executive team or the production team if and when they have concerns about a certain person or a specific situation, or they have questions about how to best navigate difficult conversations or difficult situations that do inevitably arise throughout that process. And a lot of times I will be present for some of the difficult conversations and I will be offered to cast members throughout the course of production if they are in a place where they need either crisis management or they are experiencing exacerbations in mental health symptoms or they're experiencing a panic attack, or if they just need resources or they need a reset. A lot of times I'll step in to assess if someone is able to continue with filming or if maybe they need a break or maybe it's time that they step away from filming for their own benefit or for, various reasons. So there's a big assessment piece there. And then post-production is really interesting because we do a lot of follow-up work, whether that be check-ins, whether that be trainings with cast members, whether that be navigating how things might happen or play out within the show airing. and managing and navigating all of the public feedback and kind of preparing them for ways that their lives might change as the show airs, because they're going from being quote unquote normal people to now being people that are in the public eye, where they might have someone coming up to them in the grocery store or when they're just walking to work, or they are, just out somewhere with friends or family, and talking about different boundaries, talking about ways to navigate those situations or ways that they can implement certain coping strategies if and when they need to, or they need to set certain boundaries. We also do a lot of work with production behind the scenes, which is really interesting. And I don't know that a lot of people know that this is part of the actual consulting process, where oftentimes either production or writers will consult with psychologists. I know Inside Out 2 just came out.
Amazing, by the way.
I haven't seen it yet, and I have to.
I just thought this weekend you have to see it. I cried the whole time. And I'm not a crier, so I sobbed.
That means that it's a good one, so I really have to see it.
It was so good. I think it's the number one animated. It has the biggest opening of any animated film.
That's what I read. Amazing,
which is amazing because it's about feelings. Exactly. And they did such a beautiful job, I think, of explaining all of the feeling stuff we talk about in psychology.
Mm-hmm. And bringing it to light in a way that people can digest it, which is amazing. And I think that is something that, from what I've heard, they have done a lot of consulting with psychologists, their writers, and their production team. And from the people that I know within our field, they have said it has been so refreshing to see a lot of those things portrayed so accurately. And I'm sure
accurately, yes,
way better.
Listeners, I did a recent episode on psychological mental health misinformation. It's going to air after this episode. So please listen to that as well, because it's a big deal.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And I think that's probably why I got so emotional. It was so accurate. I was like, finally, it took a animated movie for us to accomplish this as a society. But however we get it done, I'm happy. But yeah, it was beautiful.
And it's so interesting because from my perspective, I know what goes into the behind the scenes for that. So I know that they had done a lot of consulting with psychologists and mental health professionals to best portray certain emotions, and even in terms of like anxiety and those types of things, that it would be digestible for people and it would be the most accurate portrayal of those things. So we also do a lot of work behind the scenes when it comes to either helping out with the accuracy of certain emotions for actual scripted things. But we also do trainings and things along those lines with production teams as well, because those are the people who are interacting the most with cast members the majority of the time, whether that be producers, whether that be camera operators, whether that be the talent coordination team, all of the different people behind the scenes that I think a lot of times people forget about. We're doing a lot of trainings with them as well to raise their awareness of certain mental health conditions or behaviors that might be indicative of mental health conditions, or symptoms that might arise, or ways that the production process and the additional stress of that process could exacerbate certain symptoms, and ways that they might see that, and ways that they could either intervene in the best possible way or navigate those situations from a place of compassion, and really navigating those types of interactions from a more empathic place, as opposed to strictly just a job, and really talking about being a human behind the scenes, and also connecting those people with the resources they need, whether it be an on-site psychologist, whether it be a medic, whether it be additional support, etc. So just having all of the different pieces behind the scenes where we are actually involved in that. So I think that's something that as time has gone on and as the world has really become more aware of mental health and ways that different things can impact that, production has also very much gotten us involved within that world. So that way they can incorporate a lot of that knowledge as well.
No more imposter syndrome. Compass Psychological Services helps you build greater self-confidence.
Absolutely. And, I love the work that you're doing. It is so fascinating. It is so needed because reality TV is so popular.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a big part of media these days. I mean, you can't turn on the TV. I mean, there's hundreds of shows out there.
Yeah.
And while we can't talk about the shows you work with, right, obviously, I think a question for me and probably some other listeners, I know I'm not alone, right, are what types of shows are considered reality TV? Because I think there's that line, I feel like is getting a little blurred because there's so many of them these days.
Yeah. That's a really great question. So it originally started with a lot more of the challenge type shows, whether that be Survivor or The Challenge or those different kinds of things. Now they have, survival type shows and like Naked and Afraid and those types of things,
I
right?
think that's like most of my nightmares. And that becomes people's reality. It's just horrifying to me.
Sometimes when I talk to people for, a lot of these types of shows, I'm like, wow, I cannot even believe that you are actually voluntarily signing up for this show. Like, more power to you, because I don't know that I would be able to do this. So those are definitely one sector of that. There's also more of the just having people in a certain space and having them live together type of reality shows, right? So like Real World or Jersey Shore type shows where it is really just seeing people's lives play out. There are other kind of docu-series type of shows where there are certain, either let's say a mental health condition or something that multiple people have experienced, let's say, whether that be things like Love on the Spectrum, right? Or shows that highlight mental health challenges or experiences that people have gone through, whether that be
like hoarding or My Strange Addiction.
Exactly. Those types of things. So there's those different docu-series type of shows. There's also tons of dating shows, and I know that those get a lot of publicity. And those are really, really interesting behind the scenes because, again, those are very real experiences a lot of times. So there's the dating side of things. There's also, the Housewives franchise, which portrays just, again, people's lives day in and day out. So there's such a vast majority of shows and different factors that come up within the different subsectors of reality TV that could be challenging for different types of people. And of course, there's always twists and turns and unexpected things that come up when it comes to production.
Oh, I bet.
I think a lot of times it is a lot more real than people expect. And one thing that I will definitely share from my experience and talking with participants and cast members is a lot of times they will be on shows that they have seen before, right? So they'll, have seen previous seasons and they're on the show and they'll tell me either during or after filming, I really thought that there was so much more acting and there was so much more scripted types of dynamics within this show. And I really minimized what people experienced on this show until I have now gone through it and understand the actual process and how intense and how emotional this process actually is. I did not anticipate that. And so it's so interesting how even people who sign up to be on these shows and to go through the whole process themselves are so surprised by how real it actually is. And they talk a lot about that, of how, wow, I really underestimated the things that some people in previous seasons have gone through. And I now understand previous, cast members and the things that I really thought either were exaggerated or just didn't understand or minimized in some way. But it's fascinating in that way to hear their experience. And it's funny because a lot of times people from similar shows or the same show on different seasons will end up connecting, and that's how they end up relating to each other, because they're the only people who have ever really gone through the extent of that experience and can actually
Like a
relate
trauma
on
bond.
that level. Literally.
I think the takeaway today is, for people like me who are maybe more, and our listeners that may relate more to my perspective of, have watched some reality TV, definitely not a reality TV connoisseur, right? I feel like I learned a lot today. And I think my takeaway, I'm assuming a lot of listeners' takeaway, is that the empathy piece, right? Of knowing these are real people going through very real things on reality TV. I think we can all relate to going through a hard breakup. We can all relate to going through some kind of hard life experience, right? Whether it's, like I said, a breakup or, an illness or some other big life event that happens in our lives as humans. And it's hard enough when you're, have the privacy of, your own life, right? And you can kind of pick and choose who's seeing something or hearing about something, then versus doing it in the public eye with, everybody's a critic, right? And now because of social media, everybody can, a million people can watch you self-destruct or have some kind of awful moment, right? Imagine how stressful that is. Some people may be like, well, they signed up for it. Well, maybe they signed up for the show, but I don't know if people sign up for those unexpected real moments that are now playing out in the public eye. So I'm hearing that empathy is a really big deal. How we, absorb this information, how we maybe react to what we see, and kind of like a lot of things in life, pausing before we make a judgment. We make a presumption about something and maybe educating ourselves about like maybe what that issue is before we so freely give our opinions, right? And our 10 cents. Dr. Jackie is not just a media consultant psychologist. She also has her own private practice. Like me, she's a PsyPact licensed psychologist. We're the clinical ones. We're the ones that do all the fun testing. PsyPact allows psychologists like Dr. Jackie and I to see people not only in Florida where we're based, but across the U.S. in approved states. I will link that to this episode. I think it's about 40 plus states that are approved now for PsyPact. All like other industries, like nursing, like nurses who travel, we can now see through telehealth people throughout the U.S. Dr. Jackie works with teens and adults with a variety of concerns. She specializes in ADHD and neurodivergence, life transitions, self-esteem and identity, relationship issues, probably very important on everything that you do, mood disorders, anxiety, and trauma. All of her information professionally will be linked to this episode. Dr. Jackie, thank you so much. This was such a fun and interesting episode, and I appreciate you so much, and I hope you come back for another episode.
Of course. Thanks for having me. This was so fun.
Have an awesome day, everyone. This is Dr. Laura from Mind Candy, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Laura with Mind Candy. A quick note just to discuss, as I am an ethical gal, ethical psychologist, none of these subjects or the information in the podcast constitute any kind of therapeutic relationship. All of that information can be found in our terms and conditions. Everything we discuss on Mind Candy are the experience of myself and my guests, and it does not constitute advice or a therapeutic relationship. Thank you so much, and don't forget to hit subscribe.